Before I say a single word today, I need you to understand something that heaven already declared over your life. There are those who are called, there are those who are gifted, and then there are those whom God himself stops to notice. In a single month, 1 month, when the storms were many and the nights were long, you did not break, you did not bend. You faced test after test, trial after trial, pressure after pressure, and you passed them all. And then God looked down, and with all the authority of heaven, he said, I am impressed. You are the only chosen one who passed all the tests in the same month. That is not luck. That is not coincidence. That is a divine stamp, a seal placed on your life by the hands of the Most High. You were not just surviving. You were being selected, asterisk. There are moments in life that do not simply pass, they transform. They reach into the deepest parts of who you are. Pull out everything you thought you knew about yourself and replace it with something far greater than you ever imagined possible. This was that month. It did not begin with fanfare. It did not begin with signs in the sky or voices in the wind. It began quietly, the way all great things do, with a single step forward into uncertainty. You woke up one morning and the weight was already there, heavy, familiar, unmovable. And yet, something inside you whispered, asterisk, keep going. What made this month different was not the number of tests. It was not the difficulty of each trial. What made this month different was asterisk, you, asterisk, the version of you that refused to sit down when everything around you was falling apart. The version of you that chose faith when fear made more sense. The version of you that kept showing up, kept believing, kept pushing, even when no one was watching, even when no result was visible, even when the silence of heaven felt louder than any answer you had ever received. Every single day of that month was a chapter. Some days were written in tears. Some days were written in confusion. Some days you wrote nothing at all. You simply survived the page. But survival, when done with faith, is its own form of victory. This was not an ordinary season. The pressure you faced was carefully measured. The pain you endured was precisely designed. Nothing that entered your life during that month arrived by accident. Every closed door, every delayed blessing, every moment of silence from the people you trusted, it was all orchestrated with one divine intention. You were being prepared for something you had not yet seen. There are no accidents in the economy of God. Not one single thing that happened to you during that month arrived without a reason, without a rank, without a purpose already written in the archives of heaven before you ever lived a single day on this earth. Every test you faced was a door wearing the mask of a wall. You looked at it and saw obstruction. You looked at it and saw delay. You looked at it and saw evidence that perhaps things were not working in your favor. But on the other side of that door, standing with full knowledge of what was coming, God was not watching you struggle, he was watching you grow. The test of patience was not sent to break your spirit, it was sent to stretch your capacity. Because what God was preparing to place in your hands required a strength that comfort could never build. Ease does not produce greatness, stillness does not sharpen a sword. And a faith that has never been tested is simply a belief that has never been proven. The test of loneliness arrived to teach you something that community never could, that when every voice goes quiet and every shoulder disappears, the voice of God becomes the only sound left in the room. And in that silence, you learn to listen differently, deeper, with more trust and less demand. The test of delay was never punishment. It was protection. What you were asking for in the beginning of that month, you were not yet ready to carry. God's timing is not cruelty, it is craftsmanship. He does not withhold to hurt you. He withholds to perfect you, to position you, to make certain that when the blessing finally arrives, it finds a person who is fully equipped to steward it with wisdom, with humility, and with grace. Every test had a name, every test had a lesson, every test had your destiny written quietly on the other side of it. Asterisk. There is something profoundly humbling about the realization that you were never alone in that month, not for a single hour, not for a single moment, not even in the depths of the nights when the silence was so thick you could feel it pressing against your chest like a stone. God was watching. Not the way a distant observer watches something unfold from far away, detached, unmoved, uninvolved. No, he was watching, the way a father watches a child take their first steps. Close, intentional, breathless with anticipation, ready to catch, but deliberately allowing the walk, because he knew that the falling and the rising were both part of what was making you into something extraordinary. Every tear you cried in private was collected. Every prayer you whispered in exhaustion was heard. Every moment you chose to trust, when trust felt like the most irrational decision available to you, it was all being recorded in a place far more permanent than memory. Heaven kept a record of your faithfulness during that month that no human hand could ever erase or rewrite. What strikes the heart deeply is this. Out of everyone who entered that same season of testing, out of everyone who faced pressure and trial and uncertainty, God's eyes remained fixed on you. Not because you were the loudest, not because you were the most visible, not because your faith was always perfectly composed or your prayers were always eloquently spoken. His eyes were fixed on you because of what he saw living on the inside of you, something rare, something resilient, something that most people never fully develop in an entire lifetime. He saw authenticity. He saw a soul that genuinely desired to pass, not for applause, not for recognition, not for the reward at the end, but because deep within you, you understood that this moment mattered. He was watching the whole time, every single step, every single breath, every single choice you made when no one else could see. Asterisk. Most people hear the word chosen and immediately picture privilege. They picture ease. They picture a life where doors open before you even lift your hand to knock, where favor flows without friction, where the path ahead is always clear, always lit, always smooth beneath your feet. But that is not what chosen means. That has never been what chosen means. Chosen means selected for the wait, not exempted from it. Chosen means trusted with the trial, not shielded from it. When God looks across the entire landscape of humanity and places his finger on a specific soul and says, "This one," he is not pointing to someone whose journey will be simple. He is pointing to someone whose spirit is strong enough to carry what others would drop, to endure what others would flee from, and to emerge from what others would never survive. Being chosen is not a title given at the finish line. It is an identity forged in the fire of the process. It is built in the moments nobody celebrates. It is constructed in the silence between the prayer and the answer. It is shaped in the long corridor of waiting, where lesser commitments turn around and walk back the way they came. But the truly chosen press forward, not because they feel strong, but because something deeper than feeling compels them onward. You did not earn the title of chosen by being perfect. You earned it by being persistent. You earned it by returning to faith after doubt had visited you. You earned it by getting up one more time than you were knocked down. You earned it by refusing to allow your circumstances to write a conclusion that your spirit had not yet agreed to accept. Chosen is not about being better than others. It is about being willing in a way that others are not. Willing to endure, willing to trust, willing to walk through the valley without demanding that God explain every shadow along the way. This is what chosen really means. And this month, you lived every syllable of that word with your entire life. Asterisk, there is a mystery that only those who have carried great weight will ever fully understand, that the heaviest things placed upon your shoulders were never meant to crush you. They were meant to shape you, to form in you a posture, a strength, a depth of character that lightweight living could never produce in 1,000 ordinary years. You felt it during that month, the pressure that settled on your life like something immovable, the burdens that arrived not one at a time, but layered, stacked upon one another, as though the universe had conspired to see exactly how much you could hold before you finally let go. And there were moments, quiet and private moments, where you wondered if what you were carrying was simply too much, if the weight was more than the calling. If perhaps something had gone terribly wrong in the divine calculation of what one person could bear. But nothing had gone wrong. The calculation was perfect, because the weight you were carrying was not random suffering placed on an unsuspecting soul. It was a crown in disguise, heavy before it is placed on the head, uncomfortable before it is understood, unrecognizable in the process, but undeniable in the revelation. Every burden that pressed down on you during that month was adding something to you that ease never could. It was adding layers. It was adding depth. It was adding a quiet authority to your voice that only comes from having walked through something real, something difficult, something that required every resource of faith and courage you possessed, and then demanded more than that. The people who will sit under your influence, who will listen to your words, who will look to your life for direction and hope, they will not be moved by a story of comfort. They will be moved by the evidence of survival. They will be transformed by the testimony of someone who carried the impossible weight and did not collapse beneath it. What felt like it was breaking you was quietly building you. What felt like it was burying you was carefully crowning you. The weight was never the enemy of your destiny. It was always the architect of it, working in ways your eyes could not yet see and your mind could not yet comprehend. Asterisk. There are words spoken by men that carry influence. There are words spoken by leaders that carry vision. There are words spoken by the wise that carry guidance and direction and the accumulated understanding of long years lived with intention. But there is a category of word that exists far above all of these, a word spoken by God Himself, and when that word is released over a human life, nothing in heaven or earth remains the same. Asterisk. God said, I am impressed. Pause and let the weight of that settle into every part of you. Not a man, not a mentor, not a spiritual leader whose opinion you have long admired and quietly hoped to one day earn. God, the architect of every star, the author of every breath, the one who existed before time, learned how to count, looked at the way you navigated that month, and released a declaration of impression over your life. Impression from God is not the same as applause from people. Human applause is triggered by performance, by what is visible, by what is polished, by what is presented on the surface for the world to evaluate and judge. But God is never impressed by the performance. He is impressed by the private. He is moved by what happens in the moments no camera captures, no audience witnesses, no record keeper documents in any earthly book. He saw you in the middle of the night when your faith was thin and your strength was nearly spent, and still you chose to trust. He saw you in the moments when bitterness would have been the easiest and most justified response available to you, and still you chose grace. He saw you stand in rooms where your worth was questioned, your vision was doubted, your journey was misunderstood, and still you carried yourself with a dignity that could only have come from knowing whose you are. That is what impressed Him, not your perfection, not your performance, not the moments where everything came together beautifully, and faith felt effortless, and the path was clear. What impressed the Creator of all things was your faithfulness in the fracture, your worship in the wilderness, your yes to His will, even when His will felt like the most painful road available to your trembling and exhausted and still believing heart. Asterisk. There is a difference between two words that the world has long confused, long interchanged, long treated as though they carry the same meaning and deserve the same reverence, but they do not. Surviving and being selected are not the same thing. They never were. And what happened to you during that month was never merely survival. It was divine selection operating through the disguise of difficulty. Survival says, I made it through. Selection says, I was made through it. Survival is about escaping the fire. Selection is about being transformed by it. Survival counts the days until the trial is over. Selection understands that every day inside the trial is a day of deliberate formation, deliberate refinement, deliberate preparation for an assignment, too significant to be given to someone who has never been tested at the level the assignment demands. You did not simply endure that month. You were being enrolled in it, enrolled in a curriculum that no institution on earth could design, no professor on earth could teach, and no degree on earth could certify. It was a course authored entirely by heaven, administered entirely by grace, and graded not on the perfection of your answers, but on the consistency of your posture in the face of every question life threw violently in your direction. And when the month closed, when the final test was submitted, and the last trial had run its full course, heaven did not simply exhale with relief on your behalf. Heaven stood to its feet. Because what you demonstrated during that season was something that is becoming increasingly rare in a generation that has been taught to avoid discomfort at every possible turn, to exit every difficult room the moment the temperature rises, to choose the path of least resistance and call it wisdom. You demonstrated that you were not built for the easy road. You demonstrated that pressure does not destroy you, it reveals you. It pulls back every layer of pretense and exposes the pure, unshakable, heaven-endorsed substance of who you truly are at your core. You were not just surviving, you were being selected, hand-picked, set apart, marked by heaven for a purpose so specific, so significant, so carefully constructed over the architecture of every trial you endured, that the only one qualified to have carried it was you. You were not an accident, you were not an afterthought. You were a deliberate decision made in the courts of heaven long before this month ever began. Every test was a testimony waiting to be told. Every trial was a treasure waiting to be revealed. If this message moved something inside you, if it stirred your spirit, confirmed your calling, or gave language to what you have been silently carrying, then do not let it stop here. Like this message, share it with someone who is still in the middle of their test and needs to know that heaven is watching. Comment below and tell us what was your greatest test this month. Subscribe and stay connected, because your story is still being written, your crown is still being prepared, and the best chapter of your life has not yet been delivered.